Aiming for targets. Karen and I don't watch a lot of TV, but at the end of the day, a little Law and Order sometimes is nice to end the day with. Our next speaker knows everything about crime scenes. Jon Jefferson was known as an author, a documentary filmmaker, and he was good. He was published in the New York Times and Newsweek, USA Today. But it was during some work with the National Geographic that changed his life. He met Bill Blass. Bill Blass is the founder of The Body Farm. Together with Bill, he co-wrote Death Acre. Here to tell the story is Jon Jefferson. Come on up first.
Here is a place where death is seen as a beginning.
There's no other place that can document in a laboratory setting the processes that occur in nature during human decomposition.
A team of pioneering scientists explore life from a brave new angle.
To watch a body decompose from day one of the post-mortem time up until a year is phenomenal.
Inside this 3-acre plot, the line dividing life from death is erased.
It's not an area of death, it's an area of life.
Death isn't everything stopping. Death is the beginning of new processes that are invading that body and transposing it.
At the center of this quest for knowledge is the corpse of a selfless individual. His donation, a legacy of flesh and bone, will help unlock the complex mysteries of human decay, here at a place called The Body Farm.
So, I am delighted to be here. Nellika made one request. My voice is a little froggy, so if I croak up here, you'll know where to send me. Nellika made one request. She said, please warn people, some of the images are a little gory, so if you're a little squeamish, you might want to sort of, have your hands at the ready so you can close your fingers really fast. But I've tried not to get too graphic in any of these slides. I was feeling really excited about being here. Feeling pretty good about being invited. And then, I compared my laser pointer with the PINC laser pointer, and suddenly I began to question my adequacy. And then, lo and behold, I'm feeling very stylish in my velvet jacket. And I hear Miles. I mean, good heavens. I have only 2 words to say to Miles in refutation of the anti-velvet bias, and that's Velvet Elvis. If it's good enough for the king, it's certainly good enough for me. All right, so the Body Farm. This is the main gate. In what I now think of as a prior life, I worked on what I jokingly refer to as travel porn. Oh, sorry. Let me tell you my talk. I'll cover 3 points: forensic fact, crime fiction, and real-world friction. And those will, I hope, become clear by the end. But in a prior life, I spent some years making what I jokingly refer to as travel porn for the Arts and Entertainment Network. I made these lavish productions about exotic places like Florence and Monaco and Vienna. I did a huge ornate thing about the treasures of the Vatican and St. Peter's Basilica. So you might wonder why a guy whose gig is to go to places like this, would end up choosing, a place like this. And I can't answer that question. As corduroy wearer Woody Allen, infamous corduroy where Woody Allen once said, "The heart wants what it wants." So here I am. I've given up Paris and Rome and Florence for the wooden gate and the barbed wire topping of the Body Farm. A place where, all right, get ready. A place where people like this are studied as they turn into people like this. The science and the study of human decomposition, as one of the scientists in the earlier clip said, in the extended post-mortem interval. Now, why is this important? It's important because if Ollie's body is found, you know, buried in a shallow grave here in Sarasota or in a parked car or the trunk of a car, the shape that his body's in when it's found can give scientists a clue about when he was killed. And the way that they can provide that information, that guidance to law enforcement investigators, is through the detailed studies of human decomposition here at this place, the Body Farm. I got interested in the Body Farm as a result of reading a newspaper article about an FBI training exercise that was being held in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I lived at the time. A group of FBI evidence technicians were actually digging up multiple human bodies from a simulated mass grave, real bodies in a training exercise. And I thought, wow, that is really cool. You can't get more realistic than that in training. And so I said to my wife at the time, wow, listen to this. And I read her the article. She said, oh, yeah, that's the Body Farm. That's Dr. Bass. I had him in college. But you know, it was new information to me. It was eye-opening information to me. So I called him up. And I explained that I was a documentary maker and that I would be very interested in, you know, in doing something about the science at the Body Farm. And he said, well, come on over. So I actually made 2 one-hour documentaries for the National Geographic Channel. One of them was called Biography of a Corpse, and it revolved around this guy. I know his name, but he was referred to in the documentary, and in fact, he was referred to by the researchers there by his case number. He was the 31st donated body of the year 2001, so he was called 3101, and I still think of him that way. I mean, I became very intimately acquainted with 3101 over the weeks to come. We tracked his decline. We tracked the changes that were happening to him very, very closely. And I'm going to show you, here's where you might want the fingers. I'm going to show you a 30-second clip. We set up a time-lapse still camera looking down on his body that took a frame initially every few hours. And then, you know, as the weather cooled and as the changes slowed down, at less frequent intervals. But the result is you're about to see in 30 seconds what happened to him over the next 7 weeks. All right, so here we go. So these are waves of insects, insect larvae. You can see these sort of dark fluids seeping out of his body. Those will become important a future slide in just a minute. He was part of an experiment studying the effect of clothing on corpses. Most of the research that they do at the Body Farm involves corpses that are nude, but about half of the bodies that are found out in the real world in either accidental deaths or murders are found clothed. And so one of the questions the researchers have is, does a clothed body decay at the same rate as a nude body? You know, how do we need to adjust our calculations and our estimates on when that person was killed, depending on whether or not they were wearing clothes? So for this documentary, we followed this research project with 3101 throughout his decay. But at the end of it all, Bill Blass and I, who'd gotten along, sorry, I've gotten ahead of myself. At the end of it all, Bill Blass asked me if I'd be interested in helping him write a book about his life and career. And I thought that sounded pretty fascinating. He claims that I played coy, but I don't think I've ever played coy in my life, so I dispute his account. Anyway, we ended up collaborating on this book, Death Acre, with the world's longest subtitle in history, Inside the Legendary Forensic Lab, the Body Farm, Where the Dead Do Tell Tales. But it was a very interesting book. I'm going to tell you about one of the cases that's in this book. This is Interstate 40, which runs east-west through Knoxville, Tennessee. This is a little quarter-mile long dead-end road that runs parallel to 50 yards at most from the interstate. It ends right here at the foot of this billboard by the highway. It is a Comfort Inn billboard, which seems slightly ironic in light of what happens up in the woods behind it. In October of 1992, a couple of guys who were squirrel hunting up in these woods saw what they thought were the legs of a mannequin sticking out of an old crumbling doghouse up there. Turns out they were not the legs of a mannequin. They were the legs of a dead woman. They called the police and also a crew of forensic graduate students from Dr. Bass's program at the University of Tennessee. So they go out to the site. The first thing they see when they arrive is a used condom stuck to their truck tire, so they know they're in a really high-class neighborhood even before they get up into the woods. But they did a line search with a lot of law enforcement cadets from the police academy, and they found not one but 4 bodies in the woods. And I'm going to show you one right now. This is a little gruesome, but I've edited the slide so I've left out some of the most gruesome parts. There's several interesting things about this picture. This is Dr. Bass, you may recognize. What he's doing here is he is actually cutting off the one remaining hand. This woman was found minus her left hand and both of her feet. And this is a Knoxville Police Department forensic crime scene, crime lab expert who's particularly a fingerprint specialist. And he had said to Dr. Bass, Bill, can you give me a hand? And he literally meant, can you give me a hand? He took it back, he put it in this Ziploc bag right here, took it back to the laboratory, and before they left the scene with this body, he was able to identify the victim. He was able to match the fingerprint from the hand that he took back to the lab against a fingerprint off a piece of paper that they had from the apartment lease of a woman who had gone missing. Pretty amazing piece of forensic work that as well. But let me show you a couple other things about this picture. You can see the small tree, this little sapling, and I've edited it out, but I'll tell you, the woman was pulled down so that her crotch was pressed directly against this tree. And the police saw that, and they immediately thought, oh, she's been killed by someone who posed her as part of his killing ritual. In fact, that proved not to be the case. I mentioned that her left hand and her feet were both gone. Those had all been chewed off by dogs. And what Dr. Bass was able to figure out had happened is that you can maybe slightly see a little trail up through the woods here. Some dogs had found the body, as dogs will, and had started dragging it down the hill because they were trying to find a more secluded place so that they couldn't be snuck up on from multiple directions as they fed on the body. And they dragged the woman down the hill until her legs separated on either side of this small tree, and then she stuck. And dogs being, not rocket scientists, they thought, oh, well, that's as far as we can go. So they took the hands and the feet as their consolation prize. But you can also see this dark area around the upper portion of the body. Remember when the video clip of the guy's decomposition was playing? You could see these dark fluids kind of staining his shirt and puddling around the body. Those are called volatile fatty acids, and they're given off by bodies as they decay in nature. And so she has, as she's decayed, she's given off some volatile fatty acids. You can see that the skin on her arms and her torso is in pretty good shape, but she's missing much of the skin, the soft tissue on her skull, and particularly around her neck. Now, what this suggests is that there may have been an injury to her neck. The bugs that have consumed the soft tissue there, flies land on the body and they lay their eggs, and the eggs hatch into maggots, their larvae. And the maggots consume the soft tissue. And the flies particularly love to lay their eggs in places like the nostrils and the mouth and the eyes, moist orifices, or any wounds in the body. So if you find, for instance, a hand on a body that is decaying, and one hand remains fleshed and the other hand is down to bare bone, you might suspect that there are defensive wounds in that hand, that the person was trying to fend off a knife attack or something. So this woman's neck tissue is all gone. Her spine, cervical spine, is exposed. And so when they take her back to the University of Tennessee, Bass is looking for her hyoid bone from her throat. How many of you know where your hyoid bone is? How many of you are familiar with your hyoid bone? If you will clutch your throat just under your jaw and wiggle around, squeeze and wiggle around, not too hard. You can feel it wiggling around. It's this U-shaped bone, that supports the muscles of the tongue. But in cases of strangulation, which is, alas, the leading method of murdering women by men, in cases of strangulation, often the hyoid bone is fractured. So as Bass is looking through the skeletal remains they've brought in of this woman from the hillside, he's looking for the hyoid bone to see if it's intact or it's fractured. But he can't find it. It's not there. So he sends the crews back up, and he says, look farther up the hill, because the body was dragged down by the dogs. And sure enough, about 10 feet up above where the body came to rest when the dogs dragged it, there's another little patch of volatile fatty acid where she began to decompose. And in fact, nestled in the leaves, you can tell from the leaves, this is in the fall, it's in October, nestled in the leaves is the woman's hyoid bone, and it was indeed fractured. So she had been strangled. Now the police already had a suspect, or very quickly had a suspect, because about 6 months before, a woman had called the police, desperately afraid. She had been taken to this place in the woods by a man. She was a prostitute. She'd been taken to the woods by this man, and she'd had sex with him, but then he had beaten her and tied her up and robbed her and left her in the woods. She managed to get loose. She called the police. The police went out with her to the foot of that billboard, to the dead-end road where the condoms stick to the tires. And she grabs the policeman's arm and she says, "My God, that's his car. He's here." And the policeman goes up in the woods with his weapon drawn, and sure enough, there's the guy in the act of forcing another woman to have oral sex with him. And so they arrest him. But then, unfortunately, neither the woman who had called the police nor the woman who's with him at the time is willing to press charges. So he's released. He's released. And then 6 months later, 4 bodies are found in the woods. But this is the man. His name is Thomas Husky. His nickname, he actually was notorious among the prostitutes in this low-income area of Knoxville, where he preyed on women. He was called the Zoo Man because he had worked at the Knoxville Zoo, and the other place that he liked to take women for sex and for beatings was a barn on the grounds of the Knoxville Zoo. So they searched the trailer where he lived, and they found some evidence tying him to some of the victims. They found the same roll of the same kind of binding twine that he'd used to tie up one of the victims. He was tried. He actually confessed to the crime, but unfortunately he confessed after he had requested an attorney, but before he received an attorney. So in the end, his murder convictions were eventually all thrown out because of a very aggressive attorney. Luckily, he is in prison on 2 other rape charges. He was later prosecuted for 2 rapes. He's currently serving 66 years at this prison in Middle Tennessee. Astonishingly, he is eligible, technically, at least theoretically, for parole next year. But I can't imagine that any parole board in his right mind is going to let this guy out. Well, so this is one of the cases, this is one of the fascinating cases that I got to write about in writing Death Acre. But I also, I thought, well, now, am I done with this? Am I through with this? And I thought, no, I'm not. I want to do some crime fiction. This guy, Bass, is pretty interesting. It would be cool to base a fictional crime fiction hero on him. So I'd enjoyed working with Bass. We had a good time. This is us over a plate of ribs. And I guess I should point out that these are pork ribs, just so there's no mistake. But anyway, we had a good time, and he was willing to entertain this idea of crime fiction. And so actually, we started out with a book called Carved in Bone. There are now a bunch of books in this series. I'm currently finishing, this was last year's book, Cut to the Bone, which was inspired somewhat, based somewhat on the Zoo Man case. But we have a website, jeffersonbass.com. We have a Facebook page with now about 8,100, 8,200 likes. And I put, sometimes serious stuff on there, sometimes, silly skeleton cartoons and things on there. But people seem to like it. And this is the book that I'm finishing right now that I actually should be writing on at this moment instead of standing up here talking to you. But this book comes out next June, The Breaking Point. But then I said I would talk about real-world fiction, and I have about 2 minutes to do this. So, quick story. I love stories. You know, most of our speakers here love stories. I moved to Florida 5 years ago. Met and fell in love with an amazing woman in Tallahassee, a social worker and human rights advocate. And I knew I wanted to set a novel, one of these crime novels, in Tallahassee. You know, so atmospheric, so moody, so gorgeous. But I had no earthly idea what. I was at a Christmas party with a friend who knew that I had a manuscript due pretty soon, and he says, "How's the Florida book coming?" And I said, "I got nothing. I got nothing." And he said 3 words to me. He said, "Dozier School for Boys." How many of you have heard of that? Yeah. So a notorious reform school. I use the word reform and school, both in quotation marks, because it was neither. I mean, it was basically an institutionalized torture facility where sadistic guards beat and, you know, likely sometimes killed boys. You know, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement did an investigation. There's a small cemetery on the grounds of this place. There are 31 crosses marking 31 graves on there. But I talked to people. I did a lot of reading. It was a great series in the Tampa Bay Times by a reporter named Ben Montgomery, who interviewed dozens and dozens of these survivors of abuse at the Dozier School for Boys. He introduced me to one of those guys, a fellow named Robert Straley, who's an activist now to try to help keep this story alive and keep investigations alive. But I ended up, inspired by this story and these graves. I ended up writing the Florida novel was called The Boneyard. It's a fictionalized version, imagining the kinds of things that could have gone on at the Dozier School, and imagining how an investigation might bring the truth to light. But I was so appalled by what I read that I started doing op-ed pieces, and other things to try to galvanize a little more attention to this problem. And I thought, well, is that enough? And I decided it wasn't. So I contacted another forensic anthropologist I know who's here in Florida. Her name is Dr. Erin Kimmerly. She's at the University of South Florida in Tampa. And I told her about the Dozier School. And I said, there are 31 marked graves out there. I said, my guess is if you could find any way to get out there with ground-penetrating radar or probes and start looking around, I said, I feel sure you're going to find more than 31 graves out there. I introduced her also to Ben Montgomery, the investigative reporter, and to Robert Straley, the guy who's the activist on behalf of guys who were abused there as kids. Well, time goes by, as time will do, and as my time has done. But a year later, lo and behold, she's out there at the site of the Dozier School for Boys with U.S. Senator Bill Nelson from Florida, and with a gaggle of national reporters. She managed to get a permit through the state archaeologist's office, because that's a historic cemetery on the grounds of the school. She managed to get a permit to map the historic cemetery, and by golly, she didn't find 31 graves. She used ground-penetrating radar and other techniques, and she found 55 graves. At least, and there's supposedly another burial ground out there that she's still looking for. She also got permission, despite some efforts by the local county where the school is based to oppose this. She got permission to exhume the graves and try to identify the remains and determine causes of death or manner of death where she could. And so they have now excavated 55 graves. They've begun to identify some of these boys who died, many of them suspiciously or violently. And that work will go on, I suspect, for years now. But it would not have happened if not for this place. She got her training here at the Body Farm in Tennessee. I certainly got my sort of autodidact training at the Body Farm. And I will leave you with these parting words from the creator of the Body Farm, Dr. Bill Blass.
I hope you've enjoyed the tour of the Body Farm, and come back again when you can stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Watch your step. Yeah.